I was letting Glenn have a dance down here beside the piano because the piano is an inspiring object, and I wanted to get him inspired so that he could make some more nectar. And instead, he's getting into a conversation with Susan, who just wants to talk about herself. And despite the fact that he hates her, he seems to be engaging in the conversation. So I think we're going to have to take some action against that. So I'm going into first-person perspective so that I can get the maximum enjoyment out of watching Glenn and Susan fight. I don't know why she's smiling. Apparently she doesn't know what's coming next.
Martini! Slow up!
I can't believe Susan beat Glenn in a fight. I don't even know how that's possible. She must have used her fake nails to scratch his face off, because realistically that would never happen. Susan would never beat Glenn in a fight in real life. At the asylum, Glenn is continuing to attempt to complete his aspiration. He has reached level 5 of the nectar-making skill, and he has completed 50 out of 50 excellent bottles of nectar. Now all that's left to do is for him to raise 100,000 simoleons from selling his nectar, and so far he's only made 25,000, so he's only a quarter of the way there, which does unfortunately mean he's going to have to spend a little bit longer in this place with these other Sims. Although progress on the last part of Glenn's aspiration was proving to be quite slow, one of the better things about his aspiration was that making nectar was quite a singular thing to do, and with his nectar maker being on the roof, at least it did mean he got to get away from the other Sims for a little bit, except when some of them followed him up there. Selling the nectar was taking quite a long time, and the most that Glenn seemed to be able to get from a single batch was about 2,500 simoleons, which of course meant that getting to that 100,000 was taking quite a long time. But Glenn persevered, making more and more batches of nectar, getting himself ever closer to his goal, and there was some entertainment to be had as certain other things happened in the background of the asylum around him. After more time still, Glenn finally passed the halfway mark, selling a batch of nectar that brought him to over 60,000 simoleons earned from nectar sales. The last stretch was in sight, and escape from the asylum seemed closer than ever. Glenn had reached a point with his aspiration where it was just basically a waiting game, waiting for the nectar to finally age so that he could sell it for a decent profit. And so he decided to take a break doing what he loved doing best, sitting in a rocking chair and thinking about someone else's life that isn't his own. You know, someone's life who was actually happy and did fun things and wasn't just completely miserable, weird, skeptical, and evil the entire time. And Glenn began to become angry as he became impatient waiting, although he was also having a little chortle to himself. Perhaps he's the sort of person who enjoys being angry. It's hard to know with someone like Glenn. That said, when he sold his latest batch of nectar, he found that he had finally passed 80,000 simoleons in nectar sales. A little more time later, and selling some more nectar, Glenn found himself up to 96,000 simoleons. So close, and yet still not quite there, which was kind of the story of Glenn's entire life. So close to being something normal and reasonable and maybe something to be proud of, but at the end of the day, not quite there. Even Andy thinks himself better than Glenn. And as Glenn tried to argue that actually Andy was kind of a bit of a waste of a life himself, He managed to get one more finely aged batch of nectar, and selling it finally took him past the 100,000 simoleon mark. Glenn had finally completed his aspiration. Finally, he had made it, and that meant one fantastic thing. Glenn could finally leave the asylum. Wasting no time, Glenn escaped the asylum, leaving behind just 4 inmates. 4 inmates gone, 4 inmates remaining. We're halfway through the asylum challenge. It's been a long journey, but at least now we're in the homeward stretch. We're halfway through the oddity, halfway through the strangeness, halfway through this bizarre experience that has been the Asylum Challenge. Surely it can't get any more bizarre and erratic than it already has. Well, I guess that's what I get for speaking too soon. Join us next time as we pick up with someone else's story in the asylum, and hopefully make progress a little quicker and finally end this challenge. Thanks for watching. What is happening up here? Glenn and Michelle are developing a relationship. Michelle has left the asylum and she's come back to visit, and for some reason she's decided to flirt with Glenn. Apparently Michelle has forgotten what happened when she first started here. Because when she first started here, Glenn threw a little strop and went and sat in a different office in a different part of the building, leaving me to have to hand everything over to her. But she seems to have forgotten about that. She seems to have forgotten about how he hid things from her, wouldn't give her passwords for certain company systems, and just was generally unpleasant and unhelpful. All characters displayed in this playthrough are fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.